Dear France 24 television viewers and Radio Monte Carlo Dualia, welcome to the interview. My guest today is Mr. Abdel Hussein, the Deputy Oil Minister in Syria and the highest ranking official that defected. Mr. Abdel Hussein, welcome to France 24 and Radio Monte Carlo Dualia.
Hello.
Allow me, Mr. Abdou, to tell me that after 33 years serving the regime and 1 year of uprising and 10,000 victims, why did you decide to defect today? Why did you decide to defect the regime?
Well, it is not very easy to defect from the regime for several reasons. I have indeed been working for the state during 33 years. I cannot just leave like that because you have to leave everything behind you. The members of the family will have to feel the brunt of your decision. Their means, their well-being will be impacted. Well, at the beginning there was a very pacific movement at the beginning of the revolution, and things are intensified, and it turned into a violent revolution. It's because the regime itself became more repressive and violent, and following the Russian and Chinese veto, the repression is even tougher. Now, the amount of victims per day moved from 30 to 100. Whole cities are being destroyed, and all the leaders in Syria are unable to travel freely. So a leader cannot leave easily the country and has to make sure, if he defects, that his family keeps some well-being.
As Deputy Oil Minister, and given the sanctions that have been imposed by the EU and the United States, could you tell us the impacts of those sanctions on the regime in Syria?
The Syrian economy felt the European sanctions in a much harsher way than the American sanctions. The sanctions are impacting the revenues of oil. The oil revenues have been cut. For the banks, too, it has been difficult to open lines of credit for trading, to purchase or to sell anything. All this has a negative impact. At the same time, the Syrian currency, for instance, the dollar, the exchange rate for the dollar is 100 Syrian pounds, moving from 47 to 100 overnight. All this has an impact on the citizen and on the state revenues. There are no more revenues for the state. Tourism is totally handicapped, totally paralyzed. Industry, agriculture, all this is at a standstill. And there's no taxes for the state being levied. The economy is faltering. And essential things, essential needs are not fulfilled.
How is the oil ministry controlled in Syria and the revenues generated by this ministry? Who is at the head of this work?
It's the ministry who is in charge of its business. The revenues are going to the Ministry of Finance and then allocated to the budget of the state, used for many things. But since last September, with the European sanctions, there were no more revenues from the oil industry, and this led to an impairment of the Syrian economy. Even the Ministry of Oil cannot buy the oil products necessary for the state.
Despite the fact that Iran declared support to Syria?
Well, indeed, there is an Iranian support to the regime. Well, the Iranian support is delivering weapons, armaments, military support, but not what is needed for the economy.
How can this support provided by Iran be proven?
There is, or there was, a high commission led by the head of states, and the major leaders of the state were taking place in this council to coordinate the relations with Iran.
The Syrian regime is now accused of committing crimes against humanity, according to major world leaders. Is there evidence of such crimes against humanity in Syria?
There are lots of evidence. They are so numerous. What you can see in the media is just 1% of what is happening on the ground. Just yesterday, I have seen someone who was wounded, hit in the legs, and there were some bone splinters, burns, and what I have seen is that they used nails to immobilize the leg, and they used Pepsi Cola cans as a makeshift splint and cardboard to stop the hemorrhage. Those are things that I have seen myself. I can state that many things were done in Bab Amr. A witness told me that he has seen 24 cases of rape. This is one of the cases, and there are many like them, cases of massacres that are unknowable.
In one of the interviews on television, President Assad said that no president would order the crimes against the people. So who is giving those orders?
It's the president who's issuing the orders. I have a friend who is an advisor at the presidential palace who is advising directly the president. He told me that it's the head of state who's coming every morning, early in the morning, and monitoring the big and the small issues. He's issuing the orders. He's in charge in front of the people.
But the regime is saying that there are groups such as Al-Qaeda, for example, and they're quite active in Syria, and terrorist groups are armed in Syria, and they're quite active, which shows the presence of Al-Qaeda in Syria.
Well, in Syria, there is no Al-Qaeda organization. I have recently had meetings with elements of the Free Army. I know what they are doing, how they live, and I haven't noticed any elements of Al-Qaeda among them. Those are people who diverted from the Syrian armed forces to protect the citizens, and I see no one having a link with Al-Qaeda.
Now, talking of the Free Syrian Army, and as a high official, how would you assess this Free Syrian Army and Syrian opposition in general?
Well, the Free Army, Alice, they are not getting anything. There is a passiveness from the international community to support this young army, very young army. They need lots of weapons to protect the citizen, and they need lots of coordination among themselves to become a hierarchical ensemble to work in a proper way, like an army should do. And they have very little individual weapons. However, they occupy the ground in several places, and a regime can do nothing against them. And regarding the Syrian National Council abroad and the Syrian opposition, generally speaking, this is the front of the Syrian revolution. We expect a lot of them. However, the Syrian street, is interested into what the Syrian National Council is doing, and in the coming days we will be able to give more impact to this Syrian National Council within Syria.
Do you fear any possible agreements between the Syrian regime and some world powers? Because there have been firm positions, but at other times there's no genuine support given to the Syrian people, nor is it given to the opposition in Syria.
Yes, this is true. There is a passivity of the international community. There is no clear vision to solve the Syrian issue. All this is detrimental to the Syrian people. That's certain. You have seen, you have heard in the media, the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs requested from the American president to release the pressure on the Syrian head of states. All this leads to a withdrawal from the Western positions, the international positions on Syria. Lots of states have interests, and I'm afraid that all this will be liquidated at the expense of the Syrian people.
How do you foresee the future of the Syrian regime? A collapse of the regime, a civil war, foreign intervention? How do you foresee the future of Syria in the short term?
I'll state this clearly. The Syrian people has a great will. In spite of the violence, in spite of the repression exerted against it, the will of the Syrian people is very strong, and the Free Army is performing its duty. But as I have said previously, the Free Army needs weapons, and the regime is faltering politically and economically and militarily.
Mr. Abdel Hossameddine, thank you very much for answering the questions, and thanks for being with us in France 24 and Radio Monte Carlo Dualia. See you soon.